In the summer of 1988, Clint Eastwood walked into a small restaurant in rural Georgia and ordered a cup of coffee. He never got it. What happened instead, and what the owner did when he found out, became the kind of story that travels quietly through small towns for decades, passed from person to person, never quite making the news, but never quite disappearing either. This is that story. It was a Thursday afternoon in late July. Clint was driving through Georgia after wrapping early on a location scout near Savannah. He had dismissed his driver for the day, something he did often when he wanted to move through the world without the buffer of assistance and schedules and the particular performance that came with being recognized. He drove himself. A plain rental car, nothing that would attract attention. Jeans, a worn shirt, a baseball cap pulled low. At 58, Clint Eastwood had the face of a man who had spent decades in sun and wind and hard weather, but he also had the bearing of someone who had learned over those same decades to make himself invisible when he needed to. He needed to that afternoon. He had been on the road for about 2 hours when he saw the sign Ellie's Diner, hand-painted letters on a wooden board, slightly crooked, the kind of sign that told you the place had been here long before anyone thought about branding. He pulled into the gravel lot. 3 other cars, a pickup truck with a cracked windshield, a station wagon with a child's bicycle strapped to the roof. The kind of parking lot that told you exactly who ate here and why. Inside, the diner was exactly what it looked like from outside. 8 tables with red-checked plastic tablecloths, a counter with 6 stools, a ceiling fan that moved the warm air without doing much to cool it, the smell of coffee and fried food and something sweet baking in the back. Clint took a seat at the counter, second stool from the end. He set his cap on the counter in front of him. He looked at the handwritten menu on the chalkboard above the coffee machine. The woman behind the counter was in her mid-40s. Her name tag said Donna. She had the efficient, practiced manner of someone who had worked this counter for years, moving without wasted motion, tracking every table with the awareness that came from long experience. She came to Clint's end of the counter, looked at him briefly, and said nothing. Clint looked up. "Just a coffee, please. Black." Something shifted in Donna's expression, not dramatically, but with the closed quality of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in discussing it. "We don't serve your kind here," she said. The words were quiet, matter of fact, delivered without particular cruelty, but also without any apparent awareness that they were the kind of words that could detonate a room. Clint went still. Not the stillness of someone taken off guard, the stillness of someone who has heard something and is taking a moment to be certain they heard it correctly before deciding what to do about it. "I'm sorry," he said. "You heard me." Donna's voice hadn't changed. She was already half turned away, reaching for the coffee pot to refill the mug of the man 3 stools down. "We don't serve your kind. You can get back in your car." The counter went quiet. The man 3 stools down looked into his coffee. At 2 of the tables, conversations paused in the way they do when something is happening that everyone can feel, but nobody wants to be caught watching. Clint looked at Donna's back for a moment. Then he looked at his hands on the counter. Then he looked around the room slowly, taking in the faces that were carefully not looking at him. He placed both hands flat on the counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand up. "What kind would that be?" he asked quietly. Donna turned back around. There was something in her expression now, a tightening, the look of someone who had expected a different response and wasn't quite sure how to proceed. "Strangers," she said, after a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "We don't serve strangers here. This is a regular place for regular folks. We're not set up for tourists." or people just passing through. The highway has a McDonald's about 6 miles east. They'll take care of you. The explanation arrived too late and too carefully arranged to be convincing, but it gave everyone in the room a hook to hang the moment on. Clint looked at her for a long moment. His expression had not changed, calm, attentive, reading the room with the patience of someone not in a hurry to react. I understand, he said. He picked up his cap from the counter. He stood up from the stool. He looked around the room one more time, not with anger, not with the pointed performance of someone making a point, but with something closer to quiet sorrow, as if he were committing something to memory that he wished he didn't have to. Then he walked out. The gravel crunched under his shoes. He got into the rental car, sat for a moment without starting the engine, looking at the hand-painted sign through the windshield. Then he started the car and pulled out. What Clint Eastwood did not know as he drove away was that the entire exchange had been witnessed by a man at the table closest to the door, eating his lunch quietly, watching everything from the moment Clint sat down to the moment he walked out. That man's name was Robert Ellie. He was 67 years old. He was the founder and owner of Ellie's Diner. He had built the place with his own hands in 1962, had run it through recessions and highway rerouting, and the death of his wife. He knew every regular by name. He knew their orders before they sat down. He also knew Donna, had known her for 11 years, had given her this job when she needed it badly, and had watched her become, over that time, someone he trusted completely, almost completely. Robert Ellie put down his fork. He had heard everything, every word. He had watched Clint's face when Donna said what she said. He had watched the room go quiet. He had watched Clint ask his question and listen to the explanation and pick up his cap and leave without a word of anger. He felt something in his chest that he would later describe to his daughter as the physical feeling of being ashamed of something that happened in a place with your name on it. Robert stood up. He was not a fast-moving man. Age and two bad knees had taken care of that. But he moved with the urgency of someone who understands that certain moments have a closing window. He walked to the door, pushed it open, the gravel lot, the rental car backing out. He raised his hand. Sir, sir, please wait. Clint stopped the car. Robert walked to the driver's side window, which Clint rolled down. The two men looked at each other. Neither of them spoke for a moment. My name is Robert Ellie, the old man said. I own this diner. I was sitting at the table by the door. I heard what happened. Clint said nothing. He waited. I owe you an apology, Robert said. What was said to you in there was wrong. It was said in my establishment, which has my name on it, which means it was said in my name, and I am ashamed of it. I'm asking you to please come back inside. Clint looked at him, the same patient, attentive look, reading the man in front of him the way he'd read the room inside, carefully, without hurry, without a predetermined conclusion. You don't have to do that, Clint said. I know I don't have to, Robert said. I want to. There's a difference. He paused. Please. Something shifted in Clint's expression. It was subtle enough that you might miss it if you weren't watching closely. But Robert Ellie was watching closely. Clint turned off the engine. He got out of the car. The two men walked back into the diner together. The room had not recovered its previous noise level. Conversations had resumed, but with the slightly artificial quality of people who are pretending to be less aware of their surroundings than they actually are. Donna was behind the counter. She saw Robert come in with the stranger she had turned away. She saw Robert's expression. She understood immediately that something had changed. Robert walked her to the far end of the counter with the calm authority of a man who had run this place for 26 years and knew how to have a difficult conversation without making it a scene. They spoke in low voices for about 3 minutes. Clint sat back down at his stool. He had put his cap back on the counter. A different waitress, a young woman, maybe 19, who had been working the tables, brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. Her hands were slightly shaking. "Thank you," Clint said. "You're welcome," she said. She looked at him for a moment with the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone standing at the edge of a recognition they haven't quite completed. Then she went back to her tables. Robert came back and sat down on the stool next to Clint. He placed his large, work-worn hands on the counter. "She's been here 11 years," he said. "She's not a bad person. I want you to know that. But what she did today was wrong, and I've told her so, and I'm telling you so." "What did she think I was?" Clint asked, not combatively, with genuine curiosity. Robert was quiet for a moment. "I think she thought you were someone who didn't belong here, someone from outside who was going to judge us, or cause trouble, or just take up space that's usually reserved for people she knows." He paused. "That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. There's a difference." Clint looked at the old man beside him. "You said that before, about the difference." "It's something worth saying twice," Robert said. They sat for a moment. The coffee was good, strong and dark, the kind of coffee that had been made the same way in the same machine for years. "How long has this place been here?" Clint asked. "Since 1962, Robert said. "Built it myself, named it after my mother. She never saw it finished. She passed the spring before I opened, but she knew it was coming. She knew I'd build it." Clint looked around the room. The ceiling fan, the red checked tablecloths, the chalkboard menu. She would have liked it, he said. Robert looked at him. Something in the old man's face shifted, the particular shift that happens when someone says exactly the right thing without knowing it was the right thing to say. "She would have," Robert said quietly. "She really would have." They talked for 40 minutes, not about what had happened, about the diner, the town, the way small places changed and didn't change, the highway that rerouted in 1979 and took half the traffic with it, the regulars who had been coming in for 20 years. Clint drank 2 cups of coffee. He ate a piece of pie peach made from scratch, the best he'd had in years, he said, and meant it. When he stood up to leave, he put money on the counter. Robert tried to refuse it. Clint shook his head. "For the coffee and the pie," he said, "and for coming outside." He shook Robert's hand. Robert held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake. "I'm sorry again," Robert said, "for what happened here today." "You fixed it," Clint said. "That's what matters." He walked out, got into the rental car, drove away. Robert Ellie stood at the window of his diner and watched the car until it disappeared around the bend in the road. Then he turned around and looked at his diner, the 8 tables, the counter with its 6 stools, the ceiling fan, the chalkboard menu, the hand-painted sign visible through the window, the place with his name on it. He thought about what it meant to have your name on something, what responsibilities that carried. what it felt like when those responsibilities weren't met, and what it felt like when they were. It was only 3 days later when a regular customer came in and mentioned casually that she'd heard from her cousin in Savannah that Clint Eastwood had been in the area that week on a location scout, that Robert Ellie understood who had been sitting at his counter. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He thought about the conversation, the pie, the man who had been turned away and left without anger, and come back when asked, and talked for 40 minutes about a woman named Ellie who never saw the place that bore her name. He thought about what Clint had said when he left. You fixed it. That's what matters. Robert Ellie went home and told his daughter the whole story. She told her husband. He mentioned it to someone at work. The story moved the way stories move in small towns, not through newspapers, but through the slow, warm current of human conversation. And what people remembered when they told the story was never the part about being turned away. They remembered the part about coming back outside. They remembered Robert Ellie, 67 years old, two bad knees, crossing a gravel parking lot to stop a car that was already leaving. Not because he had to, because he wanted to, because there was a difference. Here is what that moment in a Georgia diner teaches us, if we let it. Dignity is not only what we do when we are treated well, dignity is what we do when we are treated badly. Clint Eastwood was turned away from a counter, and he did not shout, did not threaten, did not perform his anger for the room. He asked a quiet question, listened to the answer, and left with his character intact. That is the first lesson. But the second lesson belongs to Robert Ellie. It is easy to apologize when you are forced to. When the cameras are on, when the consequences are visible, that is not courage, that is calculation. Robert Ellie was not forced to do anything. Nobody would have known. Clint was already in his car, already leaving. Robert could have gone back to his lunch and let the moment pass and never thought about it again. Instead, he stood up, crossed the parking lot, raised his hand. That is what character looks like when nobody is watching. And Clint Eastwood, who had spent decades studying human character for his films and his craft, recognized it immediately. That's why he turned off the engine, not because he was owed an apology, but because the man offering it had earned the right to give one. Two men in a gravel parking lot in rural Georgia. Nobody watching, no cameras, no headlines. Just two people choosing in one small moment to be exactly who they wanted to be. That is the whole story. And it is enough. If this story moved, you subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that character is not what you perform for an audience. It is what you do when nobody is watching, when the car is already leaving, when it would be easier and safer and perfectly understandable to simply let it go. Don't let it go. Cross the parking lot.